Sean Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. It's probably the most serious problem facing Arizona long term: water. And Arizona is staring down more cuts to our allocation from the dwindling Colorado River. Starting in January, our draw from the Colorado, which feeds CAP, will be cut by 21%. That's nearly 600,000 acre feet. The Colorado is a crucial source of water in the West, feeding Lake Powell and Lake Mead and supplying water to 40 million people across 7 states and Mexico. Sarah Porter is the director of the Asu-Kyle Center for Water Policy, joining us to talk about this. Sarah, thank you.
Good to be with you.
Nice to see you. How dire of a situation are we in? It's amazing that, people come to Arizona and they're like, you guys seem to use plenty of water at the airport. You're not even doing the, little spray coming out of the water faucet. It's a full-on, spigot of water when you get to the airport and you wash your hands. It seems like we're not in an emergency, even though maybe we are.
I would say we are in a very urgent situation where we need, as the Colorado River using states, which is 7 states, and also Mexico, we need to find a way to save somewhere between 15 and 20% of the total amount that we're used to taking out of the river. And we need to figure that out in the next 2 months. In the past, it's taken years to get the Colorado River sharing water users to come to agreement on this kind of thing. And this is a bigger challenge than we've ever faced. The problem is that the reservoir levels are declining very quickly. And if we go on with business as usual, then they're going to hit dead pool where you can't get any more water off the reservoirs.
Yeah, we're looking at pictures of Lake Mead and Lake Powell. And obviously, we are in a 20-year plus drought. Arizona is shouldering the burden of these cuts to the Colorado River allocation. Why is that?
Central Arizona is shouldering the burden. That's the water users from Phoenix through Pinal County and Tucson. And the reason goes back to when Central Arizona needed the delegation of California to agree to the legislation to lend the money to build the CAP, that canal that brings so much Colorado River water to Central Arizona. So in exchange for the agreement of the delegation to vote in favor of California, to vote in favor, Arizona agreed that the Central Arizona Project water users would have junior priority, meaning that in the time of a shortage, CAP water users would take a cut first.
Okay, so to get the project built, we had to kind of mortgage a future a little bit, never thinking probably, hey, at some point, this may be a really rough deal we've crafted, but we had to get it done. 600,000 acre feet is the total, and that can accommodate about 1.5 million people. Is that a rough number?
I think a rule of thumb is that every acre foot is enough for about 3 to 4 efficient households per year. So we're really talking about, 1.8 million households, efficient modern households per year. It's a lot of water.
Sarah, we're on a tier 2 situation, shortage on the Colorado. What does tier 2 mean? What does that mean to the average person out there?
Well, do you mean what is it going to mean in terms of the water we use? Tier 2, the impacts of the tier 2 shortage have really already been accounted for by municipal water providers. So it's going to mean that municipal water providers step up their messages about conservation. And maybe even start up some programs to incentivize permanent reductions in water use. The big one that people think about is turf retirement, where people replace grass lawns with climate adapted low water use landscape. But we won't see immediate, very drastic cuts or pushes to reduce water use the way, for example, we've seen in California in recent years when people have been told to reduce their water use by 25%.
Why is that? Why is it that we are not as aggressive on this? It seems like right now agriculture is going to bear the large share of the burden on the cutting because ag is the biggest user.
You're right. Agriculture uses about 75% of the water that's used in the Colorado system, and cities use only about 25%. So one reason is that all that cutting by municipal users really isn't going to add up to enough to make the difference that we're looking for here. As far as the CAP users go, the reason why agriculture in central Arizona has taken the first cut is that they agreed to it years and years ago. Farmers in Pinal County agreed to give up their priority in exchange for subsidies from cities to make the CAP water affordable for those farmers. Now, what we're looking at going into the future in the next couple of months is likely to have impacts on agriculture that we have never seen before. To get to the volumes of water that we know we need to save in the system, we have got to look to agriculture to find a way to leave a lot of water in the system. And that agriculture is Yuma County, which produces the winter vegetables that the whole nation eats from November through March. It's Imperial Valley, which grows fruits and vegetables that people all across the United States eat. So those impacts will make a difference.
When I look at this video right now, flooding fields, you and I talked about this before, a couple of months ago. You look at the incredible waste through evaporation of just flooding a farm field. And you know, as I know, in Israel, they're starting to do some of this with drip irrigation to try to limit the evaporation. Are there things that ag can do to try to limit this use? Because as we mentioned before, ag uses 75%. So that is the big number. Can they do it better?
There are some things they can do, but they're really expensive and they're more complicated than meet the eye. And I want to say I'm not a farmer, but I was actually on a conference this week with farmers in Yuma, and they were saying that it costs $1,200 per acre to install drip for 1 acre per, $1,200 per acre. And that drip only stays in for one crop. It needs to be removed and replaced for the next crop. That's just the nature of drip. There are other reasons why drip isn't ideal for certain crops. So we can't count on drip as being the panacea here. And farmers in different regions have already done a lot to get more efficient with their water use. 20, 30 years ago, the canal ditches would not be lined. There would be a lot of water seeping through the ground through those ditches. Now you look around, every canal ditch in Arizona, at least in central Arizona and Yuma, is lined. That way that water doesn't get lost to the system. So there isn't, we've done all the obvious things to create water efficiency, and anything left is going to be very expensive.
Sarah, this would be very instructive, I think, for people, because as we trade agriculture land for residential, you actually end up using less water. Residential uses far less than ag. So our peak year for water usage in Arizona was when?
It was sometime in the 80s. Since then.
That's incredible when we've grown by some 5 million people in that time.
Yeah, it's really something. And of course, our economy has multiplied since then. So we're using the same amount of water as we were in the mid 1950s for a much larger economy, much larger population. And if you look to ag, we have much greater production, all with the same amount of water that we were using in the mid 50s. So it's not just the replacement of agriculture with urban lands that has created this efficiency, if you will, but it's also that agriculture and everyone else has moved to get more efficient with water use.
Okay, so if that is the case, if we're using the same amount of water we used in the 50s, or what did you say, 80 something was somewhere in the 80s was our top number?
We peaked and then we've been declining ever since then.
So why are we in a crisis?
Well, we're in a crisis. There are really two stories here. One is we have to figure out a way to use a lot less Colorado River water as the 7 states in Mexico. And we really need to figure out a way to use something like 20% less Colorado River water in order to keep the system functional. That's one difficult problem. Very hard to get people to take away people's water. The second problem is the steps that we have taken through the years, starting in 2007, have not been enough to keep Lake Mead and Lake Powell from approaching this dead pool level. And so we need to take more urgent steps to get us out of this emergency mode that we're in now, where we're worried that we could actually reach dead pool. I mean, think about how catastrophic it would be for water users in the lower basin in California, Arizona, Mexico, Nevada, if we couldn't deliver water off the Colorado River.
Yeah, and we lose hydropower too. It gets below where the turbines are turning. So it's an energy issue also. Look, we've got some video of the Salt River project, this series of brilliant, by the way, our forefathers made this happen, brilliant series of dams and reservoirs. The salt is in pretty good shape right now, right?
Yeah, it's a really different system. We'll start with the fact that it's much smaller. It's within one state and it's managed very holistically by the SRP. It's also less susceptible to the kind of climate change impacts that we're seeing on the Colorado system. And to make things even a little better, we're seeing that monsoons have a positive impact in the Salt Verde system. So all of these systems, Lake Powell, Lake Mead, Roosevelt Dam, Bartlett Dam, these were all built to catch snow melt. That's the majority of the water that these dams are built to capture. But the Salt Verde system has proved to be pretty good at catching summer monsoons as well. And so as we see these changes in our hydrologic patterns, we're seeing that the SRP system is holding up pretty well, doing its job.
It is. One final thing. What is our way out of this?
The way out of this is two things. And one is that everybody across the board needs to pitch in. Every water user in the 7 states in Mexico needs to pitch in and use less water. Every drop counts. And the second ingredient is leadership. We need leadership to make it happen at the federal level, at the state level, to pull us reluctant water users through where we need to be, which is a place where we are using significantly less Colorado River water.
Sarah, I appreciate it. Sarah Porter, Director for the Asu-Kyle Center for Water Policy. You guys do great work. We thank you again for being a guest on Newsmaker Saturday.
Thank you, John.
Great to see you. When we come back,
good to see you too.
We're going to head up really high. ASU, part of this Artemis mission to the moon, blasts off on Monday, weather permitting. Keep your fingers crossed. We're going to talk to an ASU professor who is involved in a very interesting project on board the Artemis, coming up next on Newsmaker Saturday. Welcome back on Newsmaker Saturday. On Monday, the U.S. prepares to return to the moon, a 280,000-mile journey. The Artemis I mission, scheduled for launch at 5:33 a.m. Arizona time from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. No humans on board, but 3 moonikins. They're mannequins adorned with sensors that will measure vibration and space radiation. This is a 42-day mission, highlighted by an orbit around the moon carrying the Orion spacecraft, as we lay the groundwork for manned missions there and eventually to Mars and deeper space. Orion scheduled to splash down on October 10th after traveling 1.3 million miles. Craig Hardgrove is an assistant professor in ASU's School of Earth and Space Exploration, and his team has some cargo on board Orion. Take a look at this, one of 10 Luna H-MAP CubeSats. They're little satellites that look like suitcases that will be deployed during the journey to the moon. They'll come flying out and they will collect data, and it is fascinating stuff. Craig, we're really grateful to have you on the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Craig, what is your suitcase from ASU set to do?
Yeah, our little suitcase is a fully functional spacecraft that has its own propulsion system, solar arrays, reaction wheels, radio, all the stuff you'd find in a big spacecraft that will get into lunar orbit. So it's going to find itself, navigate through deep space, get itself into lunar orbit, and eventually make a map of the south pole of the moon to try to identify regions where there are concentrations of water ice. And that's one of the main goals of the Artemis program, is to identify where are there these enrichments of water ice, so that we can send future landers and robots and human explorers to really start a bridge and form a way to get ourselves out deeper into the solar system.
And we're pretty sure now that there is water or frozen ice on the caps, on the polar caps of the moon.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence, both from Earth-based telescopes and previous NASA missions that have been sent to orbit the moon, that there's water ice in some form or another at the south pole of the moon. We really don't have a great idea of how much there is, though. And even with the best maps that we have, we're not able to say whether or not there's ice only within these deep, dark regions of permanent shadow that exist within craters at the poles, or if there's shallowly buried ice out in the crater plains in the illuminated regions, which are much easier to access for future robots and explorers. It also tells us something that's really important about the history of the moon and how the volatiles get redistributed across the surface and how much water was in the formation of the moon and the inner solar system. So as a planetary geologist, it's very interesting, but also for future exploration, it really is very helpful to have a map that's of higher resolution that we can plan missions around.
Tell me why water is so important on the moon for our future exploration.
Right. It costs a lot of money and resources to get fuel off the surface of our planet. So if we can find fuel out on the moon, on the lunar surface, where the gravity well is much lower, and we can actually use that fuel as a resource to put into our rockets and go explore out deeper into the solar system, we really have a great advantage there, so we can do a lot more exploration.
We're looking at video, well, this is animation, of what the launch will look like Monday. You've got a 2-hour launch window. Can you just give me a sense of what you're feeling personally as you're counting down now? We're really like, 2 days until this happens.
Yeah. I have been surprisingly very excited and happy. I've been working on this mission for 7 years since I wrote the proposal, and CubeSats are supposed to be quick, and so this one actually has taken up a large chunk of my life. So I'm really happy to see it move on to the next phase. It's almost like I have 2 kids at home, and it's almost like my third child, and it's like watching him go off to college or something. I really, I want to see LunaMap move on to the next phase of its life, and I'm excited to see what happens. We have a lot of things that we have to do immediately after the rocket launches. About 5 hours after launch, LunaMap deploys from its dispenser, like you guys showed, and it's going to phone home, and we have to start working right away to make sure that it's in a position to hit what's called a lunar gravity assist, so that we can meet back up with the moon several months later. That we're in a little shoebox, like you showed. We don't have a very strong propulsion system. It's really like a desk fan sitting there blowing for a long period of time. You have to keep that propulsion system on for a long time to change our trajectory in orbit so that we can meet back up with the moon and then do our science mission. So it's going to be a long road to get ourselves back to the moon and make those maps that I was talking about.
Yes.
But we're excited to give it a shot.
We're showing the separation of, in the old Saturn V and Apollo missions, this was, sending the final stage and the LEM out. This is unmanned, obviously, and you're going to do 2 unmanned on these Artemis launches. But eventually, we're going to put people back on the moon, probably by 2026. Is that about right?
That sounds right. I think that's the current plan, somewhere around there.
Boy, that will be exciting. You weren't around. You're too young, right? You weren't around for the first go around, right?
That's right. I didn't get to see the astronauts in real time land on the moon, although I've been very interested in it my whole life. My Apollo moment was watching a little RC car drive around on the surface of Mars. So I've grown up liking robots a lot, which I guess explains how I got where I am. But yeah, NASA just announced with the Artemis III, they have a series of landing sites that they're looking at, and all of those landing sites we will produce a map of with LunaMap if our mission is successful. And so I think that it's really exciting what's happening with the Apollo. I keep saying Apollo, with the Artemis program, the sister of Apollo, and so. So yeah, I think it all fits very nicely together with what we're doing here.
I have to share with you, through the eyes of a 9-year-old kid, that's when this happened, when I watched, Aldrin and these guys walk around on the moon, and it was in Armstrong and Collins still flying up above. It was something, and walking out of the house, watching it on TV, and then walking out of the house, looking at the moon and saying, can you believe we're up there? And there are still people who doubt that we did this, but we have high resolution telescopes that can see our flags and junk that we left on the moon, right?
That's right. Yes, absolutely. We were there. I can't imagine what that was like, seeing people up there. Knowing that there are people up there. That's incredible. One day we'll probably look up at Mars and
exactly.
might see people up there, right? So
I want to show tape 23. This is the CubeSat project. This is you guys, I think. You can kind of describe what's going on here on this tape. But this is you guys delivering this to NASA?
That's right. That's in July of last year. That's me and one of our operations team members and our engineers. We took the spacecraft out of a Pelican case, which we had on an airplane next to us. We bought it a seat and flew it from Sky Harbor out to Orlando, and took it out of the Pelican case. That's us doing an inspection, taking some final photographs. And that's the dispenser right there that actually we loaded LunaMap into. And they closed the door, made sure that it locked closed. Everybody gave us a nice cheer when it closed. There's us at ASU practicing putting it in a test dispenser. And we handed it off to the SLS program, their exploration ground systems team. And they lifted it up on a crane and put it on what's called the Orion stage adapter. So when you're looking up at the SLS rocket, you'll see two black squares that are diagonal to each other. The LunaMap is right next to that, sitting there. Yeah, there's us at the airport.
This is like right out of Wall-E. It's
crazy. Yeah, that's us. That's me sitting on the airplane with it, carrying it off. Through the airport. Yep. It was quite a trip.
Oh man, it's got to be exciting to finally be at this point. You talk about delicate cargo. Do you even want to take that on an airplane? I
would have much rather carried it with me than hand it over to the baggage crew.
I don't blame you. Okay, Craig, let's just talk for a minute. Some people who might be cynical say, hey, we've already done this. We've already been to the moon. We did this half a century ago. Why are we kind of retreading old ground? What would you say to those people?
Sure. We didn't have our astronauts spend a long period of time on the moon last time we were there. They might spend days at most on the moon and then return home with a lot of samples. The intention with the Artemis program and with, if you may have heard of the Lunar Gateway, which is like a lunar space station, is to have a human presence at the moon for a long period of time and a sustainable presence on the surface of the moon. And we don't really know how to do that. We didn't learn how to do that in Apollo. We just learned how to get ourselves to the moon and onto the lunar surface and back. And that's a really hard thing. A lot of those folks that did that are, on the verge of retirement or have retired. And so we need to come up with new solutions that keep our astronauts alive, both get them to the moon and keep them alive and healthy and are able to return home. And we're going to develop a lot of technologies that enable a sustainable human presence at the moon. And eventually we'll use those technologies to enable a sustainable human presence at Mars. And so I think, the moon, like I was mentioning, we're going to get to the moon with LunaMap in about 5 days. That's how long it takes the Orion spacecraft to get there, and then about another 5 days to get back.
Yep.
We want to make sure that the humans that we send there we're able to get them back in the event of something that happens. We need to have an emergency situation. They need to come back home, right? Yeah. We don't want to have them on the surface of Mars and have something happen. So I think, we really want to test this. We want to be very careful about how we do it and how we get this sustainable human presence out in the solar system. And I think the moon is a really smart way to do it, where if something happens, we can bring our people home safely.
Craig, I really appreciate you joining us. One quick thing before we go, just a guess. When do you think we're going to get to Mars? I want to see it. Oh. It's going to happen in my lifetime? God willing?
I'd love to see it. I hope we see it in the next 20 years or so.
Okay.
That's that's probably an optimistic thing, but I think that that's doable if we have the national will to do it, and probably international will as well to do that. I think 20 years might be doable.
Okay. Craig Hardgrove, assistant professor, ASU School of Earth and Science. Great stuff. Good luck. Break a leg on Monday. That's awesome.
Thanks so much.
We're back
Appreciate
in a
it.
minute on Newsmaker Saturday. Thanks as always for joining us. I hope you learned something. I certainly did. We'll see you next week on Newsmaker Saturday.